Racist white people trying to pretend like white people are experiencing some kind of racial oppression are some of the funniest people on the planet. I've been on this app for 5 years, and for 5 years I've heard this 1,000 times, and 0%, not 1, 2, 10, 15, 0% of the people that have made the statement talk about it on their page. They don't hold the right-wing people that they follow accountable for not talking about it on their page, because they also don't talk about it. But the biggest indicator that this is not happening is that the richest man in the world, who owns one of the biggest social media platforms in the world, seems to be absolutely quiet about this. We've all heard Elon Musk talking about government efficiency. We've heard him talking about cars. We've heard him talking about spaceships, more than he's ever uttered a word about the oppression that white South Africans are experiencing. So instead of coming on the people's page who actually speak out against racial oppression, go to your favorite right-winger, go to Elon Musk, and yell at them about why they are not talking about this totally not made-up oppression.
Did you know that white South African farmers are being brutally attacked and robbed of their land, and the mainstream media won't even tell you about it? But guess who will? President Donald J. Trump. He just did what no other world leader has had the courage to do. He's offering asylum to these persecuted farmers, giving them a chance at life and freedom in the United States. So why does this matter? Because this is about more than just South Africa. It's about standing up against tyranny, against brutal land seizures, and against the globalist media who bury the truth when it doesn't fit their narrative. Trump has the guts to call out the injustice, while the mainstream media stays silent, or worse. They smear him for helping. They call it a conspiracy, but the bloodshed is real. The suffering is real, and Trump is actually doing something about it. This is what leadership looks like: protecting the persecuted, standing against oppression, and exposing the lies of the globalist media.
Hey, lovely people, and particularly a quick word to my American friends who might be tempted to believe what Donald Trump is saying about South Africa, my home country, where I happen to be right now. Him and Elon Musk are racist twats who have no fucking idea what they're talking about. Because what they're doing is taking the word of a fringe racist group called AfriForum and other disaffected whites, disgruntled by the end of apartheid, feeling hard done by, and much like the Israelis, victimizing themselves when they are not victims at all, bitching about how, land redistribution is racist against whites. These are such ignorant provocateurs, and it's going to backfire on them. South Africans' majority, the black majority, and it's a multiracial, multi-tribal society now, only own a tiny proportion of the land versus the size of their population. And while white South Africans make up 7% of the population, more or less, they own about 70% of the decent land. And so the redistribution of land is to address past inequities, and the vast majority of South Africans agree and understand why that's happening and that it's a good thing. It's also under a very strict mechanism. Now, not everyone agrees, of course, with the mechanism, but the principle is what racists like Musk and Trump are railing against here on behalf of a bunch of assholes who equate equality with oppression, because for so many years, decades and decades of the apartheid era, they were the oppressor. And as we know, whenever the oppressor looks at something like equality, it suddenly becomes oppression of him. So fuck Elon Musk, fuck these idiots from AfriForum. You probably know nothing about them, but this is a bunch of, the equivalent of your kind of Proud Boys hanging on to some past that never actually existed. And a past in which the vast majority of people in this country were oppressed, suppressed, and treated much like, fortunately not quite as badly as the Israelis treat the Palestinians. So this whole railing against South Africa, I'm going to add one more point. South Africans, on the whole, all of us, white, black, Indian, colored, which is not a term, is a specific term for those of you who might get offended by that, a specific racial group. We are very, very resilient people. As a country, we have gone through a great deal, both in terms of the early part and then the transition from the apartheid era to genuine multicultural democracy. And whatever Trump throws at us, we can handle it, because we've been through far, far worse in our history. And my hope is that South Africans all turn around with one voice and tell Trump to fuck off with his sanctions and his fucking withdrawal of aid and his tariffs and all of this stuff, because we can live through it. What I'm not sure about is whether Americans can, because for the most part, all the stuff that Vivek Ramaswamy said recently about Americans being soft, not prepared to put in the hard graft, and all this stuff, I tell you, for the experience of most foreigners is true. Now, it's not true of every American I know. Some of them are the most hardworking, wonderful people in the world. But as a general principle, South Africans are far more resilient and able to withstand this kind of bullshit authoritarian pressure than any American population. So to my fellow South Africans, let's stick this out. Let's stick up the middle finger to Trump, and particularly to Elon Musk, because we know from his background that he left South Africa in the apartheid era and retains the racist bullshit that's motivating these people like Creel. And now that I'm in South Africa, I'm seeing their awesome, ridiculous tweets. Fuck those guys as well. They're the past. Most of us are the future, and it's a beautiful future.
In case you're wondering whether there's any racism in the Trump administration, consider this wild fact. So you know how they've basically stopped anybody from coming to the United States claiming refugee status? Well, they've decided to put an asterisk on that, and they're going to allow 8,000 South African Afrikaners to come here as refugees. Those are white people, by the way. So why are the white South Africans allowed to be classified as refugees and come to the United States, but a refugee from El Salvador is not allowed to, or a refugee from Panama, or a refugee from Peru? Why aren't they allowed? Well, I'll give you it's one thing. They're brown, those South Africans are white. There is very little evidence that these Afrikaners are being persecuted at home. The government's saying, we're not doing anything. No one else seems to be able to confirm that fact. Yet the Trump administration is going to leapfrog those 8,000 Afrikaners into the United States in front of everybody else. Now, I would assume that all of the Trump supporters who are against all refugees coming to the United States are going to be outraged about this, right? Right?
You may have missed this. It's not been on the news. So in South Africa, the South African government and South African president have just signed off on a law which makes it legal for land seizures, or land expropriation, as they call it, from white farmers. Basically what this law says is that if anyone can show that there's been any historical reason or historical abuse that's gone on by the landowners or by the farmers, even going back 50, 100 years when apartheid was in place, then that land can now just be seized from those farmers or expropriated and given to the South African black population. Now, many people might say, well, yeah, under apartheid, this land was taken wrongly. There was abuse by those people. But that may well have been 50, 80, 100, 150 years ago. And in many cases, the land may not have been seized. It was just used for farming. And yes, those grandparents or great-grandparents may not have been the nicest of people, but what this is going to cause is exactly what happened in Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe used to be recognised as the breadbasket of Africa. It was a very agriculturally rich and very rich country, and then Robert Mugabe took it over, passed very similar laws, sorry about that, very similar laws which took away all the farmland from people. And it turned much of the farmland in Zimbabwe into dust bowls. It caused mass starvation, mass poverty, mass migration. It absolutely destroyed the country. And I would imagine very similar things are going to happen now in South Africa. There's been huge violence against white farmers that's not been making the news. Rapes, murders, burnings, pillage of those farms. And now that's just been made legal. So what's going to happen? Well, what's going to happen is, other than the very, very toughest, all those farmers are going to flee their land. The farms are going to get handed over to people that don't know how to run them, don't know how to run agriculture properly, don't know how to farm properly. And they're going to fall apart. And that's going to lead to starvation. It's going to lead to poverty. It's going to lead to all the workers that currently work on those farms getting thrown out of work. And it's going to lead to the collapse of the South African farming industry completely. And yet that's apparently a good thing. And it's all in the name of equality. Well done.
And the current South African government is hitting back hard against Trump's allegations, saying it's completely false. They say Afrikaners are some of the richest and most successful people in the country.
White House Chief of Staff Stephen Miller commented on the situation. Let's take a look.
What's happening in South Africa fits the textbook definition of why the refugee program was created. This is persecution based on a protected characteristic, in this case, race.
Others are hitting back on those claims. Journalist Jamail Hill writes on X, "Today, white people own 72% of the private farmland in South Africa, despite being only 7% of the population. Do with that information what you will."
Going on, or disagreement, and the white South Africans want to come here.
More than 10,000 white farmers have expressed interest in relocating from South Africa to the United States after President Donald Trump signed an executive order granting refugee status to Afrikaner groups in South Africa. On February 7th, 2025, Trump signed an executive order freezing aid to South Africa, citing allegations that the South African government is confiscating land and discriminating against the white minority population.
Terrible things are happening in South Africa. The leadership is doing some terrible things, horrible things. So that's under investigation right now. We'll make a determination. And until such time as we find out what South Africa is doing, they're taking away land, they're confiscating land, and actually they're doing things that are perhaps far worse than that.
His actions are based on the land expropriation bill signed into law by President Cyril Ramaphosa, which allows the state to seize land without compensation. The South African government has pushed back against these claims, stating that the diplomatic tensions stem from misinformation. It clarified that the Expropriation Act is intended to implement land reform in the public interest, address historical inequalities from the apartheid era, and is not a tool for arbitrary confiscation. However, this did not stop Trump from freezing aid to South Africa and taking steps to admit and resettle Afrikaners under the United States Refugee Admissions Program. Neil Diamond, president of the South African Chamber of Commerce in the USA, noted that within just 18 hours of the executive order's announcement, over 10,000 inquiries had been received from South Africans seeking information on refugee status and relocation to the U.S.
Welcome. Welcome to the United States of America. We respect what you have had to deal with these last few years. We respect the long tradition of your people and what you have accomplished over the years.
You may recall that on the day he was sworn in president, Trump signed an executive order, effectively stopping any refugees from being allowed to come and resettle in the United States. Now, there's an act passed by Congress called the Refugee Act, which allows for as many as 125,000 refugees in this fiscal year, people who can prove they're being persecuted or fear persecution because of race or religion or political beliefs. And nowhere near that number has been allowed in by the time Mr. Trump took office and shut it all down. But just a few weeks later, President Trump announced that he was making an exception, and not only that, he would expedite the processing of refugee claims by one group of people from Africa. Now, you might think it's some women and children who've been maybe sexually assaulted in the conflict in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, a place that's seen fighting for decades. On this program, we reported on the violence that plighted people there in a series of programs in 2006. What has gone on here is simply extraordinary. Over the last 10 years here, there has been major fighting between a number of different groups. It has been the deadliest war in our lifetime, the deadliest war since World War II. Some 3 to 4 million people have died in this country, and their deaths have virtually gone unnoticed. And there's a whole new round of fighting that's been going on in eastern Congo between the government and an armed group called M23. Thousands have died, hundreds of thousands displaced, and widespread reports of sexual violence against women. But President Trump hasn't allowed refugees from there here, nor from Sudan, where there's been terrible fighting. The only Africans President Trump has paved a quick path for are these South Africans. And yes, they are white. They are Afrikaners, descendants of Dutch settlers to South Africa. This is the first group of people granted refugee status to enter the U.S. since the president entered his second term. On February 7th, President Trump signed this executive order carving out an exception for the Afrikaners, the white minority who created the racist apartheid regime in South Africa and ruled there cruelly and brutally until 1994, when black South Africans, the overwhelming majority of South Africans, were allowed to vote for the first time, and they voted for that man, Nelson Mandela. Afrikaners took land from black people in South Africa, repressed them, and in the 3 decades since the end of apartheid, they still have all the land they took. Black South Africans, who make up over 80% of the population, still only own around 4% of private land. Now, President Trump was asked why these Afrikaners were allowed to enter the U.S.
Why are you creating an expedited path into the country for Afrikaners but not others?
Because they're being killed, and we don't want to see people be killed. It's a genocide that's taking place that you people don't want to write about, but it's a terrible thing that's taking place, and farmers are being killed. They happen to be white, but whether they're white or black makes no difference to me, but white farmers are being brutally killed, and their land is being confiscated in South Africa, and the newspapers and the media, television media doesn't even talk about it. If it were the other way around, they'd talk about it. That would be the only story they'd talk about. And I don't care who they are. I don't care about their race, their color. I don't care about their height, their weight. I don't care about anything. I just know that what's happening is terrible. I have people that live in South Africa. They say it's a terrible situation taking place. So we've essentially extended citizenship to those people to escape from that violence and come here.
The idea that there's a genocide of white farmers going on in South Africa is just not true. It's absurd. And that's been debunked by a number of organizations, both inside and outside of South Africa. But it's become a rallying cry for the some right-wing elements inside the country, and has echoed all the way to America. Let me just go back to Sudan for a moment. An actual genocide has happened there, according to the U.S., as 2 warring factions battled for control of that country earlier this year. The U.S. accused one side, the RSF, of committing genocide. More than 11 million people have been internally displaced, while millions more have fled the country. That's according to the UN. They aren't allowed to be refugees here. And on top of this, the Afghans who worked alongside U.S. troops during the war as interpreters and guides and fixers, Afghans who fought for the United States, helped save American lives, and were allowed here under a temporary protected status. Well, now we learn that status is not going to be renewed next week, according to the Department of Homeland Security, which means many who helped save U.S. lives may be deported starting in July.
In a lot of the discussions that I was having with people on Twitter about people in South Africa who are farmers getting murdered.
Right, she had a documentary called Farmlands that she made.
Yeah, that was a weird one where people were getting angry at me and saying that I was reciting a racist conspiracy theory. I'm like, okay, but this is a racist conspiracy theory that a black person was talking about in front of Congress. Right. I mean, this is a black African guy talking about it on television in Africa, the problems with farm murders.
You know,
and then there was that guy who was the one who wants reparations, who's in South Africa, who's a very controversial character, he was kicked out of one of their organizations for doing a song singing about kill the Boer.
Yes.
He's doing it and making gun sounds, and the audience is cheering along with this song with gun sounds, and it's about killing farmers.
So listen, before I go to sleep, I need to tell you guys this, okay? So I chatted with someone from South Africa who is Afrikaner today, and who is going to be applying to come to the United States. And she was trying to explain her plight because she was seeing that a lot of people do not want Afrikaners over here as refugees. Okay, now I'm gonna strictly say that they don't want Afrikaners. We don't want Afrikaners over here as refugees with refugee status. Okay, so she continues to explain herself, and she does not mention anything about genocide. She doesn't mention anything about someone taking her land from her. She doesn't mention any of that as to the reason why she plans on coming to America with her children. This is the reason that she gave, which is not a qualification for refugee status. Okay. She said that she couldn't find a job. Not only did she say she couldn't find a job, but she said she couldn't find a job because of her race. She believes she couldn't find a job because of her race. And she also believed that her children did not have a future in South Africa. That doesn't qualify to be a refugee. That honestly does not. Do you know how many people in the United States of America can't find work? Do you know how many people just lost their jobs in the United States of America because of this administration? I mean, do they have refugee status? Can they fly anywhere and be like, oh, okay, well then, give me food, clothing, shelter, and everything, and your government needs to pay for it because we're refugees because we can't find a job here in the United States of America. Now, I'm not gonna lie. She was like, I don't have anything against my people in South Africa, nor do I, and I'm not racist. I'm just Afrikaner, and I just want to find a job. But I said, but you're not a refugee. Not because not because you can't find a job. Simply because you can't find a job, you think you're a refugee? If that's the case, you know what I'm saying? That doesn't make you a refugee. She said nothing about any of the quote unquote genocide, any of the, oh my gosh, all she said was she couldn't find a job. That's it. And the White House is allowing this.